Our reading this morning from the prophet Micah, written almost 3,000 years ago, ends in the evocative statement, "He has told you, as mortals, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justice, and to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God." To do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God, it's poetic and compelling. It captures the Judeo-Christian ethical tradition and our plan for living. It's a soundbite that's easy to remember, easy to write on a bookmark or a sticky note for later reference. It is a soothing statement that could be printed on a lavender-scented candle to give us peace and comfort. But the contrast between this call for living from and in God and the reality of Micah's Israel could not have been any greater. Land ownership, farms, and herds was livelihood. It was an agrarian country, an agrarian society. Land was security. Land was home. Land was posterity. But land barons defrauded landowners of their property, ruining them and their families. The barons acted legally per their own interpretation of the law and with the help of the religious establishment who agreed. Priests and scribes played the laws to their own advantage. They charged outlandish fees, selling blessings, selling God's favor. Opportunists collaborated with invaders from Assyria, making themselves rich, again, at the expense of their own people. When it came time to please God, guilty Israelites would wonder what burnt offering would be sufficient. How many rams or how many rivers of oil? You might say they talked the talk. They read the rubrics, but did not get the spirit of the Torah. Despite such widespread corruption and hypocrisy, Micah's words sprang from hope. As brief as our reading is, it cites example after example of God's forgiveness, of God's reconciliation and renewal, of hope based on God's inbreaking with love and compassion. To do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God. Of these three, perhaps humility is the keystone. The collect this morning reminds us, Almighty and everlasting God, you govern all things, both in heaven and on earth. How often do we, like Micah's Israelites, simply forget that God is God and we are not? Without humility, there is no justice and there is no kindness. A cartoon I saw years ago frequently comes to my mind. A baby girl is strapped securely into a baby car seat in the back of the car. It's a deluxe model of a car seat. It has a moving steering wheel, front and center, and it has a mirror so she can keep her eye on mommy. The baby is having a great time careening around corners that are invisible to all but her, but she absolutely knows that she's running the show. She is in control. How often do we forget who is actually in control? With humility, our lives are ongoing acts of justice and kindness. Nothing more is really required. When we rejoin Jesus in this morning's gospel, we're only in chapter 5 of Matthew, but so much has already occurred. We've had the extensive genealogy of Jesus in chapter 1, the Magi, the flight into Egypt to escape Herod, the killing of the innocents, the return from Egypt. That's all in chapter 2. Chapter 3 introduces John the Baptist, a very colorful and important character in our story. Chapter 4 opens with Jesus' baptism, his wilderness experience, temptations. I'm sorry, I don't know which one. Thank you. Sorry. I think I just really have to cough. It's cool. And so chapter 4 opens with his baptism and his wilderness experience with those terrible temptations. And then it continues with his selection of the first 4 disciples and his immediate launch of his ministry, gathering large crowds, healing the sick, and teaching among everyone, Jewish and Gentile alike. At the end of chapter 4, it says that he was in Galilee, the Decapolis, Jerusalem, Judah, and Syria. I wonder if any of the descendants of people he healed are still in Syria today. And you think Donald Trump had a really busy kickoff. We find Jesus now on the Mount. We know only that he's drawn another crowd. Has he shared his good news with them? We don't know, it doesn't say. Has he cured anybody this time? Don't know. All we do know is that at some point, he notices the crowds and he travels a bit further up on the mountain and gathers his disciples around him. That's curious, isn't it? That Jesus leaves a crowd behind before sharing what we all know as the Beatitudes, a cornerstone of Christianity. Why might he have begun with his chosen disciples only? I believe it's because this is his most straightforward and revolutionary word. Straightforward. Some people hear the Beatitudes and think it's a manifesto for the ultra-holy, for those destined for mysticism and otherworldliness, certainly not for regular people who don't aspire quite so high. For them, it's a straightforward but unattainable goal, so only to be taken with a grain of salt. Straightforward, some people hear it as marching orders. To them, it's a recipe to be followed. The 8 steps to take if you want to go to heaven. This would be kind of a earn your way into heaven plan. But I see it as consistent with all of Jesus' words. A little difficulty. I see it as consistent with all of Jesus' words that the kingdom of God is at hand. It is near. It is in the here and now and in the yet to be. And that is revolutionary. Whatever country the Mount is in, it is under the rule of Rome. Might makes right. Worship Caesar. Non-Romans are simply sources of goods, labor, and taxes. Bully your way to power. Show strength, never mercy. Thumbs down to all but a very few elite. Well, let's look more closely at the difference between Rome and the message from Jesus. It's revolutionary that you are blessed right now through God's grace. It's revolutionary that you are enough right now through God's grace. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. The Roman would say, it's all about winning. Why would you be dispirited? We're winning. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. They'll be comforted for the loved ones who die, of course, but we're all called to mourn for so much more, for a world that is not built on justice, kindness, and humility is a world to be mourned. No, it's about winning. I'll mourn when justice doesn't mean I win. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Yeah, maybe, but the legions will strike hard and get it back if it ever happens. I'll be good. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. We'll decide who tastes righteousness. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. If they pay me, if they kowtow, maybe some mercy. Blessed are the poor in heart, for they will see God. Caesar is God. Caesar has the same heart I have. Caesar's my friend. No problem. I see God now. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. There is no peace, but might. That was the story of Pax Romana, peace through fear. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Just try to point fingers at me with your self-righteousness. You just try. You'll never get into my heaven. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Well, they won't revile me twice. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Micah said, he has told you, O mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God? Micah lived in a time where spiritual revolution was urgent. Jesus lived in a time when spiritual revolution was urgent. When justice, cruelty, and arrogance rule, we live in a time calling for spiritual revolution. What does that mean? We are the children of God. We are gifted with God's love. We are charged to share that love. We are strengthened within a community of faithful for whom God is central and where God's people are to be the hands, heart, and feet of Christ. It is in the community that we learn to trust. It is in the community of God that we learn to tell our truth in hope and faith, knowing we will be accepted. It is in the community of God that we model for ourselves the very actions, manners of living, motives that God calls us to. It's much easier here in the community of God than it is outside. But how much better it will be when we take it out the doors. We are filled with grace, not only through our community, but through our Holy Eucharist, our great thanksgiving of God's love. This is something we will share, something we will carry with us, something that will help us love. We can do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with God, with God's help. Thanks be to God.